For today's critical thought, we are discussing a little bit more onto the finer points of action design, specifically with one of the more harder to understand and heavily polarized aspects of all action gameplay, and that is the notion of hit stun, and how much or how little it should impact your game. Reflex-driven action-based design can be very tricky to nail down if you're new to the genre or you're more accustomed to turn-based RPG, strategy, whatever kind of gameplay. But one of the easiest to miss aspects of any action system is with the notion of hit stun. Another term for this, of course, is stun locking. And hit stun has been around for a very long time. It's more commonly used, or the term is more commonly used in fighting games. The idea that when you hit the enemy, there is a brief moment where the character cannot respond to any more hits. This is where you can do stuff like hit confirm, continue a combo, or the enemy blocks it, they don't get hit stun, they can, of course, respond right back and knock you out. When it comes to action design and building an action system, hit stunning is a very important aspect when it comes to balancing the overall difficulty as well as utility that you give the player. Some designers like to give the game infinite hit stun, or everything will hit stun all the time. We see this a lot, surprisingly, from first-time developers of beat-em-ups, where they'll look at stuff like Streets of Rage, Final Fight, TMNT, and all the old classic games, and they'll just let the player infinitely hit stun. The issue in this respect is that it turns combat into just a button mash fest. If the enemy, the second you hit them, they stay infinitely stunned, provided you keep hitting them, then just keep punching them. Some games have even gone for some of the advanced tech that people have used, is that they'll know that the enemy gets hit stun, so they'll just purposely end their combo before the knockback or knockdown part of it, and then just keep hitting them. So you'll see this as like punch, 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 and they'll just keep repeating that, and the enemy will just stay infinitely stun locked. Now, conversely, what we've seen from more modern action designers is removing or just reducing the impact of a hit stun. And there are several ways that they've done this. The first, and this is something that we see from Dark Souls and a lot of Souls-likes, is that they will have a kind of internal limit on how much an enemy can be hit stun before they will automatically get out or respond to this. So you'll see this in a lot of Souls-like style games where you'll hit the enemy, they'll get stunned, you'll keep continuing the combo, and after like 3 or 4 swings, the enemy will just immediately jump back, or they'll immediately counter the player. This is designed to prevent the infinite stun lock. Now, with more traditional or not so traditional action games, what we've also seen is limiting what causes hit stun. So, when you have a light and heavy attack, the light attack will never hit stun. It will just, you can hit the enemy, and they'll just respond as you'll have to keep dodging or blocking. But then every heavy attack will cause a hit stun. The issue with this, and while I'm not a fan of it, and it kind of gets at one of the major points of our video today, is that you want to avoid this kind of predictable behavior when it comes to action design. And if the player knows that only heavy attacks will hit stun, then they're going to do every attack as a hit stun. They'll do everyone as a heavy swing. Some games will make it even trickier and say only charge heavy attacks or charge attacks will provide hit stun. And it's one of those issues that we see in games where there aren't a number of ways for the player to get in or approach the enemy. That if the enemy is just rapidly swinging, or they can just immediately rush the player while they're attacking, and the player only has one means of actually intercepting that, it becomes very frustrating because the player knows, well, there's only one way to stop them, so that's it. Another point about hit stun is, like I said, how this factors into the rest of the player's defensive options. Some games get away with not having hit stun if the player has other means of getting around or stopping the enemy. So this is where stuff like parrying, reposing, counterattacking comes in. Because if I can block the enemy or if I can parry them and then follow with a heavy counterattack, well, I don't need to worry about hit stunning them. This is oftentimes seen in games where there's a little bit more focus on defensive play rather than just going all out. We also see this in spectacle action games like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, where a good dodge puts the player in the perfect position to get a counter or a heavy hit. When you're designing an action system for your game, you want to be aware of how easy or hard you want combat to be. The more powerful and the more utility the player has, the easier the game is going to be. If the player can just walk into a room and just do this 27 times and just kills everyone, they're going to get bored. If they walk into the room and the second they attack, 17 guys immediately bash them in and the player dies, that's also going to be frustrating. And you need to be aware of how this relates to the enemy's behavior. A few minutes ago, I said how some enemies can be programmed to have auto attacks. We also see this with like auto counters or wake-ups. That if the player is standing next to an enemy who's on the ground, they oftentimes immediately will respond, or as they're getting up, they'll do an attack or wake-up attack to punish the player who's waiting to get that hit in. If they didn't do that, then of course, the player would just be able to continue the combo infinitely or until the enemy dies. But again, it runs into that issue of anytime you have predictable actions in an action game or any kind of reflex-driven design, the player is going to pick up on that. If I know that every time I'm behind an enemy, they will always respond with this like backhand swing like that, well, I'm going to know, okay, if he swings with his right hand, I dodge to the left, immediately attack, rinse and repeat. A major point about kind of how action design has evolved over the 2010s, and a little bit before that, was with a greater appreciation and a greater use of random pattern design. Probably the Dark Souls, Demon Souls, that specific style is the greatest kind of influence in this respect. So instead of the enemy always doing the same thing or waking up the same way, they'll have at least 2 to 3 different actions based on where the player is, how far they are away from the enemy, has the enemy taken too much damage, has the enemy thrown an attack of this style yet, and again, many other variables. So the player doesn't know. So let's say with that backhand example, sometimes, let's say the enemy instead of does a backhand, he'll kind of jump up and do a ground slam that is a complete AoE around them. That will strike you no matter how close you are to them, so you need to be backing off. This is where we kind of saw more of an evolution of action design, that it's no longer about just reading a fixed pattern. It's about paying attention to what the enemy is going to do and responding accordingly. But as many developers have tried to chase more elevated takes on action design, it's always important to keep track of what offensive and defensive options the player has to respond. Because at the end of the day, your entire action design must be built off of what the player has. If you're building an action game that, let's say, is more slow style, more Dark Souls, heavy grounded, the player's not supposed to move really fast, but they're supposed to do heavy hits, and you design an enemy that is a super fast sniping, they can just dart around the room shooting 15, 20 hours at a time, that's not going to feel really good for the player to fight. Now, if you give the player some kind of means of having like a range punish or a range counter, that's a different story. You don't want to design enemies that purposely break the rules or the systems you have for action. So to go back to the hit stun example, if you don't give the player any other defensive means, any other way of intercepting an enemy, and you design an enemy to be super fast or all their moves, they have super armor, so they will never stagger, they will never get hit stun, how is the player supposed to fight that enemy? The most common way, and what we see in games that will kind of do this, is that it turns into a case of dash in the enemy, do 1, 2, 3 hits, dash back. Dash forward, do 1, 2, 3 hits, dash back. Rinse and repeat. And while this is a challenging fight, it's arguably not a good one, because it once again falls back into a predictable action. If there's only one effective way to fight an enemy, that's the only thing the player is going to do No ifs, ands, or buts. What we want to see is having more ways of fighting, more ways of getting around. Again, to go back to the whole rise of Souls-like design, this is why people like the variety of builds. If I want to be super heavy armor, I'll do that. I'm not going to dodge roll do that. I'll just let me hit my 70 inches or 70 tons of armor, laugh it off, and then hit him with my giant sword. Or, I'm not wearing any armor, I'm going to be the super fast dodgy guy, the enemy will never hit me, I'll just get around, smack him, run away, smack him, run away, and that was kind of like how I played Neo. And I think Neo 2, with a little bit I did of that one. Range, spell casting, fast melee, slow melee, one-handers, two-handers, six-handers. There's a lot of different ways you can build combat. But at the end of the day, it all, again, is predicated on how you build the defensive options for your game. So, kind of the recent example that spurred this video is I was going through Eternal Strands. Eternal Strands does a lot of things. And like I said in the video and probably in the review that will be going up shortly, it's a game that is greater than the sum of its parts. And its melee combat is one of the worst aspects of it. Because combat feels very floaty. It doesn't feel good to hit the enemy. And the reason, or part of the reason, is the lack of hit stun. So it's a case where I hit the enemy with my lay attack, they do nothing. They just shrug it off. They'll continue their bite, their charge, their heat-seeking ice ball, bench throwing powers, whatever. The only times the enemy gets hit stun, once again, is with a heavy attack. But you see, here's the problem. If I'm using a heavy weapon, the heavy light attack will never hit stun. Only the heavy hit stun. Try saying that 10 times fast. And what ends up happening is we once again do that predictable action. If I only know that one of my attacks is going to guarantee keep me safe, why would I use anything else? Again, it's a very simple question, or a very simple answer in that respect. So it makes combat very repeatable, repetitive. Okay, enemy comes at me. Freeze them, run up, charge heavy, hit him with the heavy combo, freeze them, charge up, hit him with the heavy combo, and probably like 2 or 3 more times and that enemy is dead. And it's, again, this difference in terms of good, bad, and masterclass action design. Really great action gameplay is about giving the player multiple means of getting in, getting out, punch, kick, throw, kick, punch, grapple, you name it. That it all feels good, and once again, it all feels responsive. This video is about like 14 minutes long, so I don't want to go too far into responsiveness, because we'll be here for another 20 to 30 minutes. Responsiveness, when it comes to action design, is how quickly or how much the character will respond to the player's actions. If I press the attack button and the character goes like this, that's not going to feel good. It's also going to drive an action game fan absolutely mental if they try to play a game like that. And it's why we see there's this greater emphasis on very snappy design. That if I'm punching the enemy, every punch should be almost immediate as I'm fighting them. If I'm going to charge a heavy attack, I want that charge heavy attack to feel it. I want to be able to feel that character do that roundhouse kick, or that uppercut, or that slam, or whatever. And if you don't have that, then the game feels very floaty. If I go to use my super heavy, I'm going to wind my giant club back and slam attack, and the enemy just goes like this, oh, the player is going to become very depressed about your game. And you want to have different weapons, again, have different feels to them. A good example of this that we've seen from a lot of kind of more modern 3D action design, even some 2D games, is giving each weapon its own quote-unquote skill tree, or its own quote-unquote build. So the sword will have different attacks compared to the hammer, which will have different attacks compared to the dagger and the scythe, and insert your favorite weapon here. And this provides, again, more variety and more means of getting around. What you don't want to do is to tie defensive options like this 2 different weapons unless each one has a powerful defensive move. You never want to say, okay, only the stick allows players to parry. Only the club lets you grapple enemies. And we'll let someone else try to figure out why that is. Because again, people are really damn good at figuring out what is the best, worst, and meh options in your game. And if you have a character that, or a weapon that it lets you easily block, easily counter, perfectly parry every enemy that does massive damage with no risk to the player, why in any universe would I want to use any other weapon that can leave me completely vulnerable, increase damage to me, hard to use, etc.? So there is an action game that we played. I'm going to try and find the name to it after I'm done with this video. Maybe future Josh will post it here. So you had, once again, different weapons, each weapon having its own utility, its own abilities. So I remember one of them was like the sword shield combo. And the sword shield combo is the only weapon that allows you to block and counter. And so when you use that, you can literally counter, I think, like every attack in the game. Giant dragon doing his like massive claw slam, block, counter, repose. Enemy using like giant death balls of energy and fire and lightning, block, counter, repose. And it was that case of once you found that out, why would you switch to anything else? Especially, again, in a game that is designed and defined around melee or close-range combat. And this is, again, why you have to be very mindful as to what is the goal of your action design. How does the player win? Again, most of you will, of course, say, well, just punch the enemy in the face. But there has to be the mechanics that go into said punching of the face. Can the player dodge in? Can they block? Can they counter? Is this a game about grappling? Does the enemy have the means of reading inputs or doing any kind of automatic actions? A lot of the early beat-em-ups were built around auto actions and kind of input reading because they wanted to make those games extra hard. You see this when you play like a beat-em-up like The Simpsons, TMNT, and so on, where you do too many jump kicks, and will just perfectly counter that jump kick and knock you back. Or if you stand too close to them, they'll just immediately hit you through your own attack and knock you back again. It is very hard, or it's harder than it may seem, to build a really great action system. The more ways that the enemy can fight the player, can get around normal attacks, you need to give the player some means of countering that. If you design an enemy that is unblockable, unparryable, undodgeable, I don't think that's a word, unreposable, and all their attacks are 100% instant tracking, what's the player going to do in that respect? They'll probably just throw out your game or leave you a nasty review at that point. Now, if you give the player some kind of mega supreme dodge, or a move that grants him invulnerability, that's a different story. A good example, and one that I always like to bring up, of course, is God Hand. That God Hand was a game that gave you multiple ways of not only attacking, but defending. You had kind of like a standing dodge that can go into a counter. You have a backflip. You had your God Hand kind of ultra meter. I'm sure there's other ones I'm forgetting there. I know there's like an actual like dodge left to right move. And again, the more ways that you give the player the means of defending, it opens you up to designing more ways to fight the player or do things along those lines. So if you give the player 3, 4, 5 different defensive options, it is then okay to then give an enemy who is completely immune to one of them, provided you explain that to the player in some way. So the most famous example, of course, when you see enemies have like the red glowing attack, that means you cannot block this attack, so get the heck out of the way, or, once again, get punched in the face. To wrap things up for our video, action design is multifaceted. It is something that people will know almost immediately upon picking up the controller or putting their hands on keyboard and mouse as to whether or not you succeeded or failed. It's why for a lot of these games, they will have notoriously high churn within the first 30 minutes or so, give or take, of the game. Because they won't need to spend long to know whether or not they are enjoying the amount of pain, suffering that they are inflicting, or that you are inflicting on them. And for those of you watching, what are some of your favorite and least favorite kind of tropes or elements of action design? Are you a fan of heavy hit stun, low hit stun, no hit stun? Do you love enemies that can instantly track you? Or that they'll be looking in this direction as they're attacking, they will immediately do like a 180 homing to your face, no matter where they're looking? Let me know in the comments down below, and we shall see what other action excitement we'll get in 2025. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.